Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is the ESG Investing panel. And before I begin, I want to thank Peter Easton from CARE at Notre Dame. That's the Center for Accounting Research and Education, and the newly launched journal, Accountability in a Sustainable World Quarterly, on which Peter's the chief editor, and I'm one of the associate editors helping him out. So let's move on to the panel. We have a very exciting panel. Three absolute rock stars, my good friends, Bob Eccles, um, Jerry Garvey, and Eivind Lorgen. I'm just going to read a very brief introduction of these distinguished gentlemen because they're probably sometimes too modest to tell us about what they've done in their journeys in the sustainability world. So Bob Eccles is a leading authority on the integration of E, S, and G factors in resource allocation decisions by companies and investors, as well as the world's foremost academic expert on integrated reporting. So that by no means is modest, but that probably accurately describes what you've done. Uh, Jerry Garvey is a managing director at Blackrock's systematic activity equity team. And Jerry's research with the firm dates back to 2004, including his years with BGI, which is Barclays Global Investors, which merged with BlackRock in 2009. Jerry serves as the head of research for US and global active equities and is now the co head of equity research globally. So Jerry and I usually hang out over a vegan lunch and talk about sustainability research whenever he's in New York. And he lives, I think, most of the time in Florida, which is very nice. And last but not least, my good friend Eivind Lorgen, who was the CEO of Nordea Investment Management North America, and Nordea actively manages $270 billion of assets, is what I picked up from his website. He's a founding member and a chair of the SASB Investor Advisory Board. And I forgot to mention, Bob Eccles is probably the guru or the founding member and the chairperson of the SASB. So we're a bit overrepresented on the SASB fund. So the plan for today is each of our panelists take about 5 or 7 minutes and just talk about whatever is keeping them up at night in the world of ESG investing. So it's a fairly uh, open invitation to talk about anything that's bothering them in some sense. Then we spend about 20 odd minutes in terms of Q&A. Hopefully you'll keep the questions coming. And then finally we give them 5 minutes at the end to wrap up and talk about a few closing remarks or a few thoughts that they would like the audience to chew on or ponder over. Okay, so I'll get out of the way. Bob Eccles, the floor is yours.
So thanks, Shiva. So what's keeping me up at night in terms of ESG investing? Let me tell you the punchline, and then I'll work my way up to it. What's keeping me up, and is an increasing focus of my attention, is how highly politicized this whole term has become. A term that's not well defined, and so people are infusing whatever meaning into it they want to for various motives. But let's take a step back from that. If you look at ESG investing, I think the origins were really maybe 30 years ago with what was called socially responsible investing. It was values-based. It was negative screening. It was completely negative screening. It was sin stocks. It was industries that, people didn't like or support. So it was tobacco and alcohol and then oil and gas. The interesting thing about that, and Shiva, you and I just did this paper with our colleague Jing Yi, it really doesn't make a difference in terms of the performance of these companies and access to capital, but on the debt side. So I think from a values point of view, if you don't want to make money off of a stock or an industry that you find just abhorrent to you as personally, that's perfectly fine. I don't think you should kid yourself to think that you're changing the world because you're excluding, you're divesting a stock. But that's really kind of where it started. And because of those origins in socially responsible investing and modern portfolio theory, the things that you real academics and accounting and finance worry about, the belief was that you were some trading off returns, that you had, a less diversified portfolio, that there's a lot of money that you can make in these sin stocks. And so for a long time, when you said ESG investing, there was this assumption that it was kind of like philanthropy a little bit. You were trading off returns. It was kind of concessional. The evidence really didn't support it all that much, but would you say ESG investing, it was a little bit like, well, that's not real investing. And so, maybe that's not something that you really want to do if you're really focused on returns. Then kind of fast forward a little bit because you got all this enthusiasm for a whole bunch of reasons we don't have time to get into. You had the other fiction that came up was that, look, ESG investing, it's great. You can make money, you can make more money because, these are the trends and you can save the world at the same time. You can make the world a better place. That's not true either. So people were confusing ESG investing, really ESG integration, we'll get to that, with essentially impact investing, where you were looking at dealing with the externalities being created in the world. In a European context, this would be SFDR 8, which is ESG integration, SFDR 9. When you look at the statistics, there's a classification system of responsible investing. There's screening, and then there's best in class, and there's thematic, norms-based. One of the most fast-growing strategies is ESG integration. That really comes down to what are those material issues, that's the work of SASB, that are important for enterprise value creation. People that don't like ESG from the left think, well, that's only enterprise value creation. It's not dealing with the fact that an oil company is producing products that, make the world a worse place, even if it's being responsibly managed. Kind of from the right, this ESG investing has become sort of associated with woke capitalism. We'll get to that later. I think the challenge for doing ESG integration, because these are risk factors that you need to take into account. SASB sort of identifies what's material, varies by industry. It's different for oil and gas and banking and pharmaceuticals. It's really a data problem because you don't have standards for measuring these ESG factors like you do for financial reporting. You've got financial reporting standards. And so there you've got work going on with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which you've referred to, that then merged with the International Integrated Reporting Council to become the Value Reporting Foundation, which has then been consolidated into the International Sustainability Standards Board under the IFRS Foundation. So they've issued a general requirements exposure draft and one on climate. And that's really, I think, a very important step to try to get to having reliable and controllable information for sustainability performance like we have with financial performance. The focus there is so-called single materiality, those issues that matter to enterprise value creation. At the same time, you've got EFRAG, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, which is advisory to the EU for the sustainability, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. They've come out with their set of standards. They have 14. Big emphasis and differences that they say we're interested in double materiality as well. So we're looking at the negative and positive, but it's mostly negative externalities being created by a company's products and services. And so there's a big question of whether we'll end up like we have with accounting. We've got IFRS and we've got US GAAP, or between the ISSB and EFRAG with the CSRD, will we at least have a global baseline? And then, of course, the SEC has come out with its proposal, and it's really pretty much focused on climate. So you've got 3 proposals out there in the world that, people are trying to kind of figure out, and we'll see how they get reconciled. And I think having data so that investors can analyze a company's sustainability performance on the material dimensions, just like they can with financial performance, will be important. That's getting lost in the shuffle of this politicization. It's complicated how it came about. I think a lot of it is based in the kind of excessive claims that were made for ESG investing. There was a lot of greenwashing. We saw what happened with DWS. My friend Desiree Fixler was thrown under the bus on that. So there was too much greenwashing, marketing, ill-defined ESG funds. Shiva, you and I have talked about it. That has basically provided ammunition to people that think ESG investing isn't enough because it's really not focused on impacts, and people that think it's too much and it's somehow interfering with capitalism. So that kind of got created for itself. And the data problem, I think, can be solved through standards. The political problem, particularly in this country with how polarized and politicized we've become, that's a much bigger issue, and I think it's a scarier issue, and I'll have some things to say about that at the end. That's it.
Thank you so much, Bob. Jerry?
All right. First off, maybe I want to start off on a really positive note, which is not what kept me up at night, but something I want to celebrate. It's actually an internal thing, but I'm pretty sure our group is going to stop using the word risk. when we talk about ESG, which makes me very happy. First off, because our job is actually to deliver returns, and also because I think it kind of almost, how would I put it, takes away much of the interest in the topic. If you want to avoid risk, you just go to benchmark or don't do anything, right? And when you dig into how people talk about ESG, it's actually cutting off left tail risks. If you cut off a left tail risk and you don't have a big carry, that's alpha, and that's how we're going to think about it. So no more risk talk. It's all alpha. It's harder, but it's a lot more interesting. Next one is integrating into our lives. One thing we've been struggling with, and just in recruitment, is what on earth does a good ESG person look like? What kind of qualifications? One thing we found is it actually is helpful. And I was reminded by this because we were all summarizing our favorite activities. I found it very powerful, and you might think about this as educators, to integrate with people's interests. So people tend to be either scientists or outdoors people. Right, that's pretty evocative if you're a skier to think about, right? Climate, and yeah, you get the point. As a fisher person, oh my God, yeah, I have some pretty obvious interests in how, actually all the way up to snow. S is team sports, and personal outreach to the community. And then G looks to me more like combat sports, maybe weightlifting, but it is, G is a little bit face-to-face grappling. It's not my thing, but there are people who love it, and it is interesting. The best people in our stewardship group actually do tend to have backgrounds in things like wrestling, which is what it's about. The second one, I would really love it if we could get back, and this might help with the politicization. I don't want to claim we could do this, is to sort of go back and integrate this stuff with, call it, people's ordinary lives. Econ 1, for example, I found Alex Edmond's book quite helpful because it's not really about negative or positive externalities. That was Ronald Coase's Nobel Prize winning observation. It's not negative or positive. There's scarce resources. And if you recognize who cares about the resource, then the whole goal is to make sure that it flows to and is used by the person who values it most highly. And I view his word as grow the pie means behave as if the Coase theorem were true, even though it's not. So behave as if you're going to get compensated for any good that you do and ding for any bad you do. And I think we're starting to recognize that. I'd like to call out one place, basically the value of ordinary products. I remember seeing, what some company was telling me that Costco shipping, the Chinese shipping company is all evil. There's no positive. Now we all know they do some polluting, et cetera. But look at what they ship. They ship grain and wood. That's pencils and school lunches. Right? Do we think that's not valuable? In most ESG things, that gets no credit, and it should. It's really important. And I actually think just one thing about like when we talk about emissions intensity, we're dividing it by revenues. Now, why would we do that? Right? It's because revenues, my answer is, any scaler, you can choose thousands of scalers. Revenues are kind of a first approximation to what this stuff is worth to people. And then you can get into when that's not true, et cetera. But it's like, this is not just an arbitrary scaler. This is, companies doing stuff for the world. And a lot of it is good, bad side effects. And finally, this is hopefully what scope 3 will come to. There's some emissions, but they're not emitting just for fun, right? They're emitting to help do stuff that ends up, feeding the world and educating children. And if we can do it more cleanly, that's great. But you need to recognize that it's actually being done for a reason. That's it.
Thank you, Jerry. Eivind?
Thank you for inviting me to this distinguished panel. I think I like to start where Bob ended and continue with SASB. I'm the chair emeritus for the Investor Advisory Board. I'd like to start with the story from 2016. We were a handful of investors in Midtown in a hotel room with very bad ventilation. And Chris Ailman from CalSTRS said that, wouldn't it be great if we can get the corporate issuers to report financial material ESG matters in a consistent, reliable, and standardized way? And we all looked at each other. This is in 2016. I said, yes, but 2016, 2022, fast forward these 5-6 years, SASB is now in the process of being integrated into the IFRS. We established the ISSB. There's also been a few mergers in reducing the number of standards and frameworks along the way. But now we're at a monumental point, and I almost have to like pinch myself to think about that in 2016, we're sitting a handful of investors, and now SASB is being a part of the IFRS, and we established the ISSB. I mean, there's only 2 global financial accounting standards out there, and they're being a part of one of them. So I like to sort of take a moment. I know we're impatient, but, it took financial accounting 75, 80, 85 years to get where they are now. And it's only taken us 5, 6 years now to really get to this point. So I think we sort of have to take a deep breath and, say, let's make sure that the financial materiality gets properly integrated, and that we can build a bridge over to the U.S. once this is fully the first corporate issuer global disclosure framework will be issued next year, and hopefully we can build a bridge over to the U.S. Unfortunately, like you mentioned, there's a lot of politics in the U.S., and it's very hard to discuss with people. I must say I have a lot of sympathy for Galileo, who said that the world was round, and certain individuals in the church wasn't too happy about that. But it's very hard to discuss scientific research-based evidence with people who believe that the world is flat. And while in Europe we've decided that the world is round, we are discussing how to achieve things, how to implement things. While in the US, we're still discussing if the world is flat or round, which makes it very politicalized. Because, we're discussing many of these fact-based findings versus beliefs. And it's very hard to argue against beliefs. So I think that, and I'd like to get more into that later, but we can see some very, very significant differences how asset managers, asset owners in the US are organized versus how they're organized in Europe to actually deal with these issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eivind. And I want to keep an eye on the chat in case questions come in. But let me ask a follow-up question, maybe for Jerry, since you mentioned education. What's the ideal profile of a person that you would like to hire at Blackrock, Jerry? Somebody, if you could tailor make a person in a lab, what kind of ESG skills are you looking for?
To be honest, mostly just interest, curiosity, and skepticism, because there may be some good science-based facts, but most of the work in ESG is anything but. And in fact, I think we need to wrestle with that, right? Just a lot of the skepticism people have is pretty well founded. There's a lot of motivated research, shall we say, in all sides of this thing. There's like keywords you can flag, and that might be a way. People who interview and they want to use words like "prove" in our world. Like, okay, no, we need to move on. It's refute. How about that? That might be good. Learn. So those are kind of the keywords you look for. Mostly just curiosity, and also, frankly, for want of a better word, resilience. Right? Because as Bob said, this thing is politicized, and you won't survive unless you have both a belief in what you're doing, but also an ability to learn and get over it. Because my God, I think we all know this. It can be a brutal place to work.
It's interesting because I often tell my dean that you want an MBA to actually have the skills of a PhD, which is what you've told me. Good luck chasing that. So let's set that aside for a minute. Maybe I'll come back to.
There's a right tail, the small number, right? Amazing people.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But, a small right tail of MBAs. You're absolutely right. But Bob, you're very good at understanding how institutions evolve. Right, because you're a sociologist by training, and I'm a bean counting numbers guy, help me figure out 25 years from now, what would this look like? I'm guessing a lot of the politics will hopefully settle down because we'll have many more 121-degree days. So hopefully some of the skeptics will eventually learn that climate change is indeed real. Where will all this go? Will all this simply become mainstream investing? Is it like the internet days when, we used to have .com companies and now everybody is basically a .com company? 20 years from now, is this how you see the future? In this crazy zoo of institutions, you rattled a few. I mean, I know some of these, but not all of them.
So let's be optimists. I mean, say the pendulum kind of swings back the other way in 20 or 30 years. I probably won't be around then, but I'd just like to pick up on a couple things Eivind said. So, Eivind, it's shorter than from 2016. I remember writing a green paper with Richard Barker. Should FASB and ISB set standards for non-financial information? And we published it in 2018. And if you would have told me in 2018 that 2 years later the IFRS Foundation would come out with a consultation, I wouldn't have believed it. So it was like, I mean, it is momentous, as you said. I mean, this is just an extraordinary step forward. So what does it look like in 25 years? I'll tell you what it looks like. It looks like the same mess that we have with financial reporting, right? So, you talked about that, Eivind. It's actually more than 75 or 80. If you track it back, I'm writing a little series from a sociological perspective with a colleague that Shiva knows named Kasbi Soonawala. And the first one is called The Long and Winding Road to Financial Reporting Standards. And it's like, man, back and forth, and Norwalk Agreement and Convergence. The second one came out today. It's called The Complex, Contentious, and Changing Nature of Financial Reporting Standards. You guys go back and forth on goodwill and financial instruments and this and that and the other thing. And is it an asset or liability or it's something else? And then the third, which will come out maybe in a week, is putting financial reporting standards into practical perspective. So companies should go, oh, well, I'm unique, so I'm going to publish my non-GAAP earnings. And then the investors decide, well, is that kind of a flim-flam or is that a more accurate representation? They complain about the standards they have to follow and all this transparency. Then what do? They have investor calls and they break down their profits and their cash flows by business segment and project it out 5 years because they think that's going to be useful. Does that mean these standards aren't useful? Of course it doesn't. These are social constructs. US GAAP is a social construct. IFRS is a social construct. These aren't derived from the laws of physics. These are human constructions as to how we're going to represent a certain reality. We've agreed upon that. Then we've got a baseline to operate on. And so I think the same thing is going to happen with sustainability reporting standards. We could still have FRAG and ISSB butting their heads a little bit. We've got kind of managing earnings. We'll be managing our greenhouse gas protocol emissions. You can look at financial reporting and you see with the long experience that we've got with something that's really got a more solid base in double entry bookkeeping, look at sustainability reporting standards. It's going to be messy. It's going to be complicated, but it's far better. We're in a far better position for having that than if we didn't have it at all. Because now when the investors get together with companies, they don't argue too much about what was your revenue recognition policy. They may have some questions, but we take that as the starting point, that it's kind of reliable and relevant across at least competitors in the same industry. We're going to have that with sustainability reporting standards. So I think it's going to go mainstream, like you said, Shiva, but I think we need to manage our expectations about how clean and clear it's going to be and that it's not going to solve all the problems and cure cancer and a lot of things that I think people are hoping for by having these standards for sustainability reporting.
Just a very quick follow-up, Bob, and then I'll come to it. So the thing that puzzles me about the integration idea, why would these things show up in cash flows? Because by and large, they're externalities. And who's forcing these companies to internalize these externalities? So unless we have some kind of regulation or a carbon tax or something, why would this ever show up in a DCF? That's something I've never understood about. So let's say, we iron out the reporting and by and large, we have esoteric conversation among pundits on what goodwill is, which is what we do now. Let's say that morphs over to the ESG space. Why would this show up in cash flows? Unless somebody forces you to do it. I mean, we can talk about human capital and how, maybe there are some $100 bills lying there and firms can do better with human capital. I see that. But the externalities idea, especially the negative externalities idea, I just don't see how this would show up in a DCF ever.
So can I just point out the obvious irony of an accounting professor that's published a countless number of articles in referee journals asking the sociologist about how to think about this showing up in cash flows? So
I thought you're the world expert. That's what you're.
Well,
your
I'm not an
website
expert in
says
cash
so.
flows, but look, it's a good question. And I think the answer is that unless you've got carbon prices or you've got regulations, it's not going to. You could sort of have some pressure from the investors. They want to know. This is where we need to be realistic and modest about what standards do. Financial reporting standards don't, tell you what you should project your earnings to be. Companies do that. So what you know is that if a company makes commitments on carbon reductions and they report on it, you've got sort of a reasonable degree of confidence that the information is accurate. But the standards themselves don't necessarily change behavior. They just give you a way to report on what you're doing for these externalities. And, Jerry can jump in on this. To be incorporated, I think you're going to be looking, investor pressure can happen some if they want to know this because they do believe in some fashion in their own view that it'll affect cash flows. But for it to really do so, I think you're going to need to have pricing is going to be important and regulation is going to be important.
Jerry, did you have a view?
Yeah, I mean,
because
what's funny? No, it's funny. So we don't really. We're an active quant investor, and we don't actually try and do what you guys kind of have to do, put dollar values on things. It's mostly just ranking stocks as better or worse. And we find that I don't know how this moves with like recognition in dollar and cents. Most of the stuff we view as what we call a brown M&M. Little story. You ever heard that term? That's the rock band Van Halen in the 1970s had a contract which said one of their contract terms: we need M&Ms in the dressing room, but if there are any brown ones, we will refuse to play, and you have to pay us. And we thought that was rock star excess. You can look this up. There's a beautiful, YouTube video where the leader explains no. We were using more voltage and firepower than anybody had ever done before when we were performing. We were at shoddy arenas in the Midwest, and we were worried about the wiring. So we had a contract of electronic specifications that was that thick, and buried in the middle was this stupid brown M&M clause. So you get the point. There's a brown M&M there. It means you didn't read the contract and we're all going to die. And so I view a lot of these things as having that property where it indirectly signals something really important. But it's a funny, we struggle with that in materiality. So we find emissions were really important long before any regulation because emissions indirectly indicate variable input use. And interestingly, it kind of turns materiality on its head in that case. And actually, companies that are carbon light, it's actually even more of a powerful signal, even though it's not directly material, because in order to change your emissions when you're already carbon light, you need to change your underlying processes a lot. So we don't even do materiality for that reason. It's more like, wow. So instead of basically saying, is that a good thing or a bad thing, you ask instead, what kind of company would do that? And then recognizing that you know very little, and then it informs you in all sorts of ways you never anticipated. Now, this doesn't help you guys who have to report dollar and cents amounts, right? It just says, tell us this stuff, and we'll figure it out. It's actually very helpful. I guess you could even say material, but not really in a way where it's not you get the point. It's a proxy for cash flows or a signal for cash flows. It's not cash flows. That's how we use that stuff. So we love it. The more you guys get to disclose, the more we love it. But we use it differently.
Eivind, so let's talk about comparing Europe to the US.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I would also, just to follow up on that, it's also about for the corporate issuers to access financing and cost of capital. And of course, but you would think that the more you disclose, the more you're transparent within the material ESG factors, that you have better access to financing, better control of your cost of capital. If you're raising debt, you can have access to a green bond, a sustainable linked bond, et cetera, et cetera. So I do believe it will have an impact, a financial accounting impact as well. So, but to your question about, well, a big difference for me in my previous role as CEO and president of Nordea Asset Management in the US versus Europe is that many in the US, ESG topics is kind of like a special topic that needs to be dealt with by the board or the CEO. While in Europe, this is daily operational management. Not even the top executives could be involved. And we just talked about one of you guys mentioned negative screening or the producing a list of companies that we're not investing into. These companies we would publish, and I say we, but Nordea Asset Management still publish the companies that are screened and a reason why they're screened on their website. So if you go now, you'll find the exclusion list, and you can read why this company is excluded. But this has never been in a top management. This has never been on a board. This is just daily operational management, and it's the portfolio managers, investment specialists, it's the professionals, the industry professionals who are making these decisions. They're not based on some political belief. They're based on sound operational management decisions. So I think this is really a big difference. In Europe, it's daily operations. In the US, it's very often a special topic that needs to be dealt on a very high level. And the problem then is there's nowhere to escalate it. Then it's up there. And then you have blue people versus red people. And then you have the very interesting or non-interesting debate going on in the boards. That's just one.
Eivind, this is a fascinating point you made, right? So you're almost suggesting that there's money left on the table because somehow the European way of integrating sustainability into the investment process is more informative. That's what Jerry says. It's a proxy for input use. How is that compatible with the idea that U.S. markets are reasonably efficient, people are smart, they're always looking for opportunities? How come this much money is left on the table if your claim were indeed true? How would you refute that claim? I think Jerry likes to use the word refute. I'm not going to say true. But bottom line, is there money on the table in your view, Eivind?
What is the question? I don't think I got the question.
The question is, I spent a lot of time setting it up, but sorry. So I thought what you were suggesting was that the European process of integrating ESG into the investing process was somehow better, right? Economically better. Forget the values conversation, which would suggest that the US way of doing things, maybe as an add-on or whatever you describe the US way of doing things to be, is somehow inferior, and there's money to be made if one were to just improve upon that process. Do you believe that?
Yeah, maybe. I just think it's about evolution, isn't it? I just think we have evolved differently, and of course, in Europe we've had legislation supporting management, and I think we've been better in Europe to keep the politicians out of our boards. I mean, even look at the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is owned by the government. But if you look at the executive board, there's not one single politician. They're all industry specialists. These are not individuals with beliefs. These are financial specialists within their field. So I think it's just we haven't evolved. And also, with a very strong union, in Europe, we're a union, the EU Commission proposes, we legislate with the parliament, and it's up to each country to implement. We have a very loosely federalistic system in the States, and then states are challenging federal regulation. If it's the EPA or the SEC, each individual state in this void creates their own legislation, like in Idaho, making it illegal for the public pension fund to take ESG into consideration, or in Texas, where they are boycotting Jerry's firm, and West Virginia we know all about, etc. And then we have on the other side we have New York City with their Fashion Act, which kind of fuels, that these red states think that the blue states have these liberal activist legislation. So I just think we're evolving on different levels, and this. I would love if the researchers could look into this in more detail. What actually the end result is out of these two fundamental different ways of operating.
Can I just say there's an obvious irony, Eivind, in what you're talking about. So this all started with socially responsible investing, now being branded as the woke crowd. They were kind of doing these exclusions for whatever values-based reasons. Now you've got the Republicans doing the same thing for values-based reasons. This isn't based on facts. It's so I don't believe in climate change or whatever it happens to be. So you Blackrock or all these different banks and stuff, well, no, we're not going to use you. And we're going to see how that goes in terms of their financial performance and their cost of debt and how well their pension funds are managed. It's an interesting and fascinating natural experiment that's going to play out over the next 10 or 20 years, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Before I forget the audience, there's an interesting question from the academic side of the house here. If you had to maybe list 3 issues or topics that each of you would like to see more academic work on, what would that be? And we can either do it in random sequence, or I could start with Bob.
So 3's a lot. Let me start and give you one.
Okay, even 1 is fine.
I'll give you one, and then these are the general. I'll buy them some time. I'll give you one, and they'll go, and then they can buy me some time. So then I guess, given who the audience is, you don't want kind of questions that a sociologist would study. So we'll kind of leave those aside because that's all qualitative stuff that.
No, please do. Qualitative stuff is totally fine.
Well, then I'll do a qualitative one later. I'll tell you a fascinating research project. We don't have the data yet. Shiva, you and I have talked about this. So all of these studies about the performance, whether it's at the company or the fund level, kind of does ESG investing pay? Does it do better? So this has been the target, has been all of these kind of so-called ESG funds, and a lot of them are so-called. So you've got, Vivek Ramaswamy, who's kind of leading the charge, with his Woke Inc. book, and he's got this Strive Asset Management, and you've got some ETF called Y'all. So I see as these basically politically motivated, and there's a God Bless America fund, whatever they are, I think as these anti-ESG funds come out, there is going to be fascinating research to be done looking at the components of these funds. How do you determine whether they're woke or not? If you find out they're woke, are you going to screen them out? Are you going to exclude them? Are these funds going to perform better or worse than, some similar basket of stocks, however you do this? So these guys that are sort of pushing this anti-ESG, anti-woke agenda that are raising money on that basis, man, they better perform or it's going to look pretty weak. And so I'm not an investor or a financial guy or whatever. But, I wouldn't assume going in that it's going to be a duck walk for these guys and that they're going to do better for all the obvious reasons. Great research project.
I love that. Jay?
So the first one is, and actually I hadn't thought about this. It actually came up from something that was mentioned earlier, which is Shiva, I don't think the $20 bill argument being made about Europe versus the U.S. I think it may have been talking almost about what we call asset owners, right? Right. So you're talking about, the sort of folks who kind of manage the pension funds, right? And that is quite interesting. We love our big European clients. They are amazing, right? We don't get a lot of fees out of them. That probably means they're doing a good job too, right? It's not fun for us, but it's probably a good thing for their beneficiaries. The U.S., I think another research, just look across all the different sort of pension funds, et cetera. And all I can tell you is firsthand, more like clinically, that there are some awesome little groups. I call it City of Milwaukee, for gosh sake. Seriously, the quality of the people on that board is amazing. And you walk in expecting little and you get amazed. And then other big ones are rather less impressive. But maybe that'd be a wonderful research topic. Just see, performance of asset owner, right? You could say who chases returns, because we know they do that on average, right? That's what our old friend Sunil Vahal found, right? And maybe some don't. Maybe some of these folks are genuinely either contrarian or not driven by momentum, and they might be the people to really look at. That'd be my first one. And the second one would just be, can we please be a little more aware of the divergence between the stock market and the economy? That's one thing that's always bothers me. You talk about decarbonizing a portfolio, and you all know it's easy to do. You just exclude some emitters, but what the hell world is that consistent with? Right? So I would always like to start off with, what kind of world are you envisioning? I would say, your base world should look like the economy or the market. And if you want to have a green one, then tell me a viable green economy, right? And then let's invest like that. But don't just tell me you've got this portfolio that's green that has nothing to do with an operating society or economy. So those are my two.
Oh, thank you, Jim.
No,
Eivind?
Yeah, I like to.
We bought you a lot of time. So.
Yeah, I just like to continue a little bit where Jerry left off. I mean, first of all, I agree with you. I mean, there are some excellent boards in the U.S. I was just trying to sort of generalize to make the point. Not all boards are good in Europe, and not all bad in the U.S. Of course not. But I think that what you mentioned earlier, Jerry, about that you're not going to use the word risk anymore. And I think I would like to have more research on sort of identifying ESG factors from general risk management factors. I think those two get much sort of muddled together. And I would like to prune the data, clean the data, and really to understand what is an ESG factor that impacts XYZ versus just general risk factors. So that would be number one. And number two really is what you are doing, Professor Shiva, is to really to price externalities and to be able to bring it back to corporate issuers' balance sheet. I think that the day we can price diabetes cost to society, or if it's plastic waste, or if it's carbon, or whatever it is, obviously the tobacco master agreement is an indication of externalities. But I think that would be the other and I think that will be the future in 5, 10, 15 years from now. The way we've been able to identify material financial factors, industry-based, I think we'll be able to do that more accurately when it comes to externalities, and to really have good models to how to price that and to accurately bring it back to balance sheets. Because right now, I think a lot of times we take these externalities to balance sheet. I mean, to be quite honest, I think that these companies probably go bust because just the way we calculate it. And I'm not sure if that is really helpful. But
it's extremely helpful.
But that is probably the reality, the way it is.
The idea of an ESG balance sheet, I think, is intriguing.
Can I give you 3 more quick ideas, research ideas for the audience to work on? So I referred to the SFDR 8 and 9. So 8 is ESG integration, 9 is impact. So it's like trying to do impact investing in public equities around the externalities. There's a lot of those out there. I'd love to see somebody study their performance. And I'd like to see, particularly with the Article 9, is there some way to measure if they're having impact or not, right? Because that's the whole thesis of Article 9. I have friends in the asset management industry who talk about creating transition funds, so kind of brown to green, or this term khaki. Is there an investment thesis in there that you kind of invest and then you engage and you improve the performance? Is that a good investment strategy? And then finally, the whole kind of EU Green Deal and what they're doing with the CSRD and the taxonomy and all that. I mean, the thesis here is that you're going to move capital, towards green investments, and it's going to create competitive advantage for the EU. And in a way, it seems to ignore to me a fair amount, not completely, this problem of, I agree with Jerry, just divesting. It doesn't sort of change the real economy. I don't know how, but I'd like to get some sense of whether as a national strategy, did this Green Deal on the SFDR, did it move capital, in the direction to make it more green? And did that lead to some kind of competitive advantage? Because we're running the other experiment here in the United States. So I think that'd be interesting to do.
No, fabulous. We can go on and on. There's so many things to worry about, right? So a couple of follow-ups, Eivind. So I've often told people, just read the risk factors that a hyper-defensive lawyer has written down in your 10K. try to label those as E and S and G and miscellaneous. Then go to the SASB documents to at least do something about trying to quantify those. And hence my earlier comment about, even if we leave these on balance sheets, unless somebody is going to force these people to pay, the as if Alex Edmonds' word only works to that extent. I mean, I really admire Alex, but as if and reality are two different ideas. But having said that, we're almost getting close to the end. So anything else you guys want to talk about before we get into closing statements? I think 1 hour is not enough. We can do this for like 2 hours. But anything on your mind that you probably want to get off your chest, perhaps, before we get into closing?
I just wish I'd been more. Sorry, go ahead, Bob. Go.
No, just my question is, so it'd be great for people to do this research. Will the academic journals accept this kind of research now or not? In the top tier journals that people have to publish in so they can get promoted and get tenure?
That's my pet peeve. Okay, so Bob, that's half the reason behind setting up the journal that Peter Easton really pushed for, ASWQ, I think. And that's meant to be a forum that gets practitioners and academics together. Will that eventually get anybody tenure? Maybe not. But it'll probably be a way to show impact. Now, a lot of the serious journals are indeed publishing some of this stuff, but as you know, the usual problems, they're obsessed with identification. I think it's a destructive mission. We are, becoming more and more rigorous, but becoming irrelevant. Just like accounting standards, you need a balance between relevance and reliability.
And we're wasting a lot of human capital.
But irrelevant research.
We've got an economic model that is wasting human capital. We've got all of these smart people that could be doing research that makes a difference to the world. And because they're being shoehorned into the academic journals the way they are now, they aren't. And so I just think it's a shame.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we should admit to the brown M&M thing, right? Because that's not causal, right? Right? That just says it's not causal. Let's not argue about whether it's causal or identified. It's bloody important, and you didn't know about it. All right, there you have it. You can do a follow-up work where you figure out what's the deeper thing we've identified. But if you just insist on causality, it'll never come to light, right? And it's like, of course it's not. Remember that original paper we published showing the companies that had the best-looking ESG disclosures actually had more and not fewer controversies, right? That's not causal. Right? My God, it's just a warning about how you look at ESG disclosures, right? That's all. And what the hell? That's great, right? I mean, we didn't know that before. And certainly from the point of view of an investor, prediction is all we need, right? As long as it holds out of sample, right? That doesn't have to be causal. It just has to be true next year. Hey, yeah, but that would be amazing. If you guys could get past causality, that would help a lot.
Yeah, I love that. And just one more follow up on that. So many so-called causal papers are getting published. Common sense tells me there can't be these many treatment effects. Changing anything is so effing hard. How are these people able to document so many treatment effects? Is something that's always escaped me.
Shiva, you do know that somebody showed, John Karpov, I think, documented that my one natural experiment paper is probably not valid. So I feel good about that. We had one with, we did the anti-takeover law stuff in '99, and somebody followed. It's like, this is not an experiment. And yeah, you're right. Oops. So what the hell?
But I'm happy that happened, because we need more of those. And this is the other thing. When I talk to my ESG friends, I said, I'm just on an intellectual mission to discover what we know in the field. And the more papers are replicated, the more they don't replicate. They don't extend. So it makes me worried. And Jerry, this is your earlier point, this fine line between salesmanship and scholarship. We have to be careful. We don't want to kind of breach that line and get into the other side. But in the interest of keeping us on time, I'm now probably going to go to closing statements. And here the order was reverse alphabetical. So we will probably start with Eivind first, then hope to go to Jerry, and then Bob. Eivind, closing statements, thoughts?
Yeah, no, back to what I said. I think this about getting SASB and sustainability accounting properly merged with financial accounting, and that goes well, so we can get financial materiality in place and a global disclosure framework in place. The other thing is that European legislation doesn't push U.S. legislation that does push U.S. legislation, but doesn't become a challenge for the U.S. that we can reconcile and that we can get other jurisdictions along, China, Japan, Australia, Singapore, etc., along with us. So I hope that somehow that we can find a way to cooperate here now, and because this is when we're in a time period where this is important and monumental. Then the third thing I would say, clarification on the single materiality versus the double, and get that in place. And then, of course, fourth, to get politics out of this and reduce the temperament, and let science and the professionals work with the issue.
That's a long wish list.
Yeah, I know.
But I hope half of them come true in the next 10 years. So I don't want to take away too much of Jerry and Bob's time, but I just want to mention one thing. We've talked a lot about reporting. To me, that's like a small fight. If there's anything that's going to save us, it's the science, it's the engineers, it's the technology. Yeah. Right. And sometimes we don't devote enough attention and time to those things. I'm not technically qualified to understand them. I'm a casual consumer of that work. But isn't there where the action really is?
It is.
Unless somebody comes up with some great way to decarbonize, it's going to be a long slog. You can report away as much as you want. But
no,
we need engineering solutions.
So much resources are going into decarbonizing technologies. So much resources is going into understanding all the data, climate data, and I agree. We haven't really talked about that at all, or not enough on this panel. But maybe next time.
I'm going to go to Jerry and Bob, and if you have a few extra minutes, I'm going to leave you with one question. If you come across a climate skeptic, what would you say to them in maybe 30 or 90 seconds? But that's my backup question. But Jerry, the easier part, closing statements, if any thoughts?
First, I'd like to apologize because I know this was supposed to be a bit more about reporting and disclosure, et cetera. And I wonder if we can learn something.
It can be about anything we wanted to.
No, and I'm just wondering if we can learn something from what I think I've experienced. Sorry, I just lost the window. There we are. I've experienced as a win, and you guys probably feel like it wasn't, but I think it was, which is option expensing. I mean, it's a mess, and if you dig into it, if you get technical, it's easy to make fun of the disclosures, right? I mean, they are, yeah. But behaviorally, I think it's been on net a win. They aren't used as willy-nilly as they used to be. And from our stewardship team's perspective, we no longer argue about granting of options to employees. We ended up saying, since they're expensed, that's like arguing about whether they're paying their people too much. We don't argue about that, nor should we. We just argue about whether the assumptions made in expensing them are appropriate. But that's a huge step forward. And anyway, and it isn't perfect, as you know. I mean, it's actually it's easy. Some of it's almost silly, but my God, it's a social construct that I think made things better in that area, and maybe we can see what we can learn from that. Messy, but I think all in all successful case. So.
No, it's fascinating, Jenny. You mentioned this because it took a stock market crash for a standard to get passed, right? Yeah. So this is the tragedy of human nature. I don't know what climate calamity we have to wait for before we can pass carbon reporting in the US. But fair. Bob?
So before I got my useless degree in sociology, I got another useless degree at MIT in pure math, but I wasn't good enough to become a pure mathematician. That was my goal, but I couldn't, so I had to get another line of work.
That's why we become accountants. We're not good at math or anything.
You couldn't become economists, so you became, accountants and stuff. So, but it was useful to me, my topology courses, because as you saw, Shiva, I wrote trying to understand, this politicization, a little piece called The Topology of Hate for ESG. And I was thinking about it, Eivind, when you were talking about the flat earthers. So I've got the sustainability flat earthers. They don't believe in climate change. I got the sustainability Taliban. Nothing's ever good enough. People are now objecting to me using these terms. I think it's polarizing. It's, probably fair enough. They're fed by the sustainability opportunists. They're out there greenwashing right and left on the company side. Then there's this little group of sustainability pragmatists, which is what I see as trying to do. in terms of reporting. So then Vivek Ramaswamy starts coming out with this stuff, and I write a snarky little piece called Grift Capitalism. They're talking about woke capitalism, grift capitalism, the GOP's brilliant strategy for ripping off ordinary Americans. It gets to what we were talking about in terms of excluding all these financial firms and what that's going to be for their cost of capital. So I had a Republican friend write me and say, Bob, I'm really disappointed in your article. You're just kind of, putting fuel on the fire, of this big, kind of rhetorical debate. I expected better of you. And so I wrote back and I said, look, I didn't start this war, but fair enough. So I'm running my own, it's not even an experiment. I'm quite dead serious about this. I'm going to try and reach across the aisle. So people are saying it's going to be hard. So just coincidentally, today I published a little piece. It's not snarky like my usual stuff. It's called a tutorial on ESG investing in the oil and gas industry for Mr. Pence and his friends. And all I do is kind of set it up and say, look, we all care about America. Maybe we differ a little bit on kind of climate change, but here's the SASB material issues for exploration and production, midstream, refining and marketing and services. Tell me, and I think Jerry's point about it's not just risk, but tell me what's not to like on that list from an investor point of view. Take away the rhetoric as there's something on this list that there shouldn't be. And so I have sent this to my Republican friend. I'm reaching out to conservative organizations, and I'm like saying, look, I'm more than happy to talk to you in public and private. Let's kind of put all the heated rhetoric on the different sides aside. And if we can do that and start to build this little coalition that is the sustainability pragmatist, recognizing we've got different views, we've got different politics, but unless there's a way to tone down like just the temperature of the rhetoric on this thing, I mean, nobody's going to win. So that's what I'm trying to do. So anybody that's listening to this, if you've got some Republican friends, send them this piece, and I think we should try and see if we can get some dialogue across the aisle.
No, I think you're spot on. If it's Republican belief system or Democratic activism, I think we have to start building a bridge so that we can have a constructive dialogue and conversation regarding this topic. At the end of the day, like you said, who doesn't want corporate issuers to have access to financing and having efficient cost of capital? Who doesn't want that these corporate issuers produce products and services that are good for society? So I don't think this is a political issue. This is about the well-being of our society, both from a consumer point of view, but also from an investor point of view. So I think this goes hand in hand, but we need to bring the temperature down.
Agreed.
Bonus question. We have a couple of minutes. So if you come across a climate skeptic, what would you tell them?
House arrest.
And let's say they're reasonably convincible, right? If they're religious and then it's kind of hard to reach them. But I'm sure there's a fairly big middle in America, and I frankly wish we had somebody from the other side on the call, because we've agreed too much. That never makes for a good debate. But if you had to convince a climate skeptic, take a shot at it. I have 30 seconds to give each of you at best.
So I think you don't convince a climate skeptic. I think you make them think. And what I would say is that, if you've got children and grandchildren, it's a complicated issue. So you can't be for sure. You think you're right, but you can't be for sure 100%. But what if you're wrong? What if you're wrong? And then what do you think that world looks like, 30, 50, 80 years from now for your children and your grandchildren? And just think about it.
I would say to a skeptic that they might not believe in climate change, but I think they believe in pollution. And I would start there to see what impact they think pollution has, and if they like to live in a polluted society. And then we can discuss sort of the degree of that impact. But I think we can find a common ground there by using words we understand on each side of the aisle.
Thank you, Eivind. And I hope to get
maybe
back.
Maybe just start and just build on that. Just start with these success cases of all the places where the environment has gotten cleaner, right? It's not that hard to find, right? And maybe that would be just ways. It's pretty good, isn't it? Right? If you live in the Midwest or live many other places, like there you go, right? You catch striped bass in the Potomac. That wasn't the case.
No,
right?
I love that idea. Love that idea. Show some success stories. Yeah, that's a good one. That's
Why don't we do more of that?
And like you said, Dr. Shiva, the amount of investments being done into decarbonizing technologies, investments done in renewables in states like Texas, which has, I think, 25% market share in renewables in the US, but also a very strong oil and gas state, but it creates tremendous amount of jobs. So I think, these are issues, these are facts that I think we like from both sides of the aisle.
This has been fabulous. I learned a lot. Thank you so very much, Bob. I think we've already lost Jerry.
Good fun.
He probably has a hard stop. And of course, Eivind.
Thank you.
Huge pleasure, as always. Thank you so much for coming and
good to see you.
Informing us.
Good to see you. Good to see all of you.
Entertaining us as well. Thank you again.
Take care. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.